question for anybody has any question for Dr. Suhail? He wants to talk about it. If nobody has any question, I can. It's not a question, but Dr. Suhail.
Yes.
Okay. About takfir, I want to go back to the same point. A couple of days ago, they were talking about the premier for Germany and Angela Merkel. What she did for the Arab, the Syrian, and the people they say she's kafir. We don't have to deal with it, you know. Anyway, I tried to say what you are saying. I receive a lot of attacks from the people, but this not shocked me. What shocked me today, they interviewed one guy. He was in Palmyra jail in Syria for 13 years. When he was in the jail, because he was too old in the jail, he was cooking the food for the other prisoners. He's communist. He's a Christian. He's not Muslim. And he's communist. And in Ramadan, he was cooking the food at breakfast in the iftar time. Some of the prisoners, they refused to eat from his food because he's kafir. And this is the only food available for them.
That's total mess.
You know, it's very deep, this rooted in the mind of the people, you know.
It's very unfortunate. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I mean, there are two roots for this problem. And both of them, they are essential elements of the dominant Salafi understanding of Islam. As I mentioned before, and I still believe that almost every Muslim is Salafi until proven otherwise. People are, and it became that if you're not Salafi, you can be attacked or intimidated because it's Salaf Salah. What are you talking about? So they, not only they controlled or dominated the Islamic sphere, but now they have the standard. I mean, if you are not Salafi like them, then there is a big question about your deen. Because there is a hadith that says the best generation is mine, generation of the Prophet, and then the next and the next. And because we are way downstream, we are very bad generation or very corrupt. We should not even think. We should just rely on the work that was done by the Salaf Salih. Terrible idea, horrible idea that maybe by itself is responsible for a big percentage or chunk of our situation, because it is a very efficient recipe for stagnation. I mean, once you cancel your mind or you freeze it, you will not go anywhere. And then if you add to that hadith of bid'ah, that and they translated like this, which is every innovation is a bid'ah, and every bid'ah is dalal, and every dalal is finnar. So you combine these two hadith, that tells you, and of course, la ijtihad ma'a nas, that you cannot exercise any ijtihad if there is a text, even though, subhanallah, yani, from day one, there is hardly any surah that did not have more than one interpretation. From the days of Sahaba, radwanullah alayhi. So it has that root that there is a version of Islam that is the true one, the one they have it, and everything else is wrong. The other thing is that this idea of hisab, even though it is clear-cut in Quran that there is nobody has the right or the ability to judge anybody else. It's not your problem. It's not your assignment. You don't have the tools to do it because you don't have access to people's hearts and to people's intentions. You see only the appearances, and the appearances can be very deceiving. positively or negatively. So, and still, you have people who spend the bulk of their time on a task that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reserved for himself, which is to sit down and decide who is the believer, who's the Muslim, who's the kafir, who's going to go to heaven, who's going to go to hell, who has the right aqidah, who doesn't have the right aqidah, who are you, to who appointed you. This is self-appointed judges. It's none of your business. It's not your issue. It's not your problem. Period. There is another job that you are not doing it. That's the one that was assigned to you. Is to be the best you can be, the best version of yourself, and to be the best ambassador of Islam. That requires a lot of tazkiyah, and most of those people, they're not. And second, to maximize your contribution to the greater good, to make this world a better place. That's islah. Now, you're not doing these two missions that were assigned to you, and then you spend the bulk of your time either reading books of heritage or Turath at the expense of studying the Quran and the Hadith, studying anything, but you limit yourself to reading the books of Turath or heritage, and then judging people. And by the way, this judgmental attitude is the starting point of a road that leads to terrorism, because it's a chain reaction. We start by asking Mr. X, where should we put him? Muslim or kafir? That's the first point. And then in our discussion, we need a scholar, and the scholar says, or we come to the decision that conclusion that this is kafir. Then we go to the scholar and say, what should we do with that? Because that's the next question. That's the next logic sequence. He's kafir, so what should we do? Of course, we cannot deal with them, and we cannot have any relationship. Why? Because wala and bara. Oh, okay. And then what? And then should we leave him like this? Kafir? And then they find the scholars will issue a fatwa, and then you find somebody who will execute. That's how it happened. By the way, that's throughout our history. It's not only now. Religious scholars, including the leaders of madhab, were persecuted because questioning their aqidah or questioning their deen. Scientists were persecuted. Everybody who dares to think or to think out of the box just have to be aligned with what the establishment tells you to think and to do. And whatever they see it's right, you have to accept it as right. And that's another hadith, because there is a hadith that says that you need to obey your leader or ruler, even if they beat you, even if they steal your money, take all your money. So doesn't matter. جلد ظهرك, أخذ مالك. Still, can any reasonable person imagine Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and this religion of freedom and justice, that he will say something like this? Say, obey blindly, even if they torture you, they beat you, they take all your money, you need to obey them. This is definitely hadith mawdu'a. You tell me it's in Bukhari, I don't care. Can't be. This is embarrassing for us even to say it, because it's a very degrading to the Prophet ﷺ. Can't say this. Cannot say something like this. This is a religion that tells us that everything in it was meant to establish justice. ليقوم الناس بالقسط. متى استعبدتم الناس وقد ولدتهم أمهاتهم أحرارا. Just one ruler was biased. Amr ibn al-As and Umar al-Khattab was so angry, so mad. And then you tell the Prophet tells you to accept injustice against you. So that's why we keep saying that the The hadith, first of all, the Quran, we need to distinguish. I just had a long discussion yesterday with someone. We need to distinguish between what is foundational in Quran, what is contextual. Quran was doing two things at the same time. We have to be really aware of this. And it did it in a great way. Quran was meant to be guidance for all people at all times. But Quran was dealing with the real problems, practical problems in Mecca and Medina at that time. It has to come up with solution for it. These become contextuals, and the first ones are foundational principles. Quran found slavery. Now, it's easy from day one to say principle, slavery is wrong, free all slaves. Nobody will do it because it was an integral part of the economy. That's but people's wealth was there. It doesn't mean that it is right, but Quran came up with those gradual solutions to solve it. Should we stick to those gradual? No. Those gradual were meant to deal with the reality. Khamr, alcohol, drinking was forbidden over like 4 stages. Why? Because there is a reality that Quran was dealing with, that drinking was an integral part of the Arabs' lives. And if it came from day one saying drinking is haram, everybody has to stop, there might be big problem. But it took them gradually. So there was, you come now and read hadith of Milk al-Yamin and hadith of Fakku Raqaba. They don't apply anymore. There are no slaves. Does this take anything away from the Quran? No. It's the beauty of the Quran that it provided the guidance for all people at all times in all contexts, and at the same time it solved existing problems. It has to deal with them. Otherwise it would have been theory. If Quran was only stating principles and did not deal with those problems at that time, it will be theory. It will not be implementable or applicable. And that's why you can see that Quran did not mention anything that those people do not know. There is no internet or IT or cyberspace or none of this. Even the fruits that did not exist in the area was not mentioned in Quran. That Allah does not know. No, Allah knows everything. But Quran were dealing with the reality and talking to people and to engage them and to resonate with them. And that's why it came in that practical language. So you come and say that all the Quran is foundational. You can take any verse, apply it in any context. That's a Salafi understanding, by the way. You can take any verse, apply it in any context. If any hadith in Bukhari or Muslim is authentic, regardless, violates the principle of Islam, it does not present the Prophet ﷺ in a good way, it doesn't matter, it is authentic. It contradicts a verse, then it has abrogated the verse, or we need to find another interpretation of the verse to match the hadith. We are the product of this understanding of Islam. And this understanding of Islam guarantees stagnation, guarantees takhalluf, backwardness. And that's why we are in this situation, because of that dominant understanding of Islam that froze our minds and caused us to live for more than 12 centuries under dictatorship, absolute power by one individual, and when he dies, he transfers us to his son. And those centuries caused a lot of damage to the human person, to the Muslim mind and the Muslim personality, and here we are. That's what you see, the product that you see. And that understanding is beyond repair. Anybody who come to say I'm doing Islamic renewal of Islam and take that Salafi understanding and try to patch it, they're wasting their time. You know, there are sometimes cars or appliances, they will tell you that they are beyond repair. It cannot be fixed because it is built on a very wrong premises and bad premises. And among them, by the way, now one of the reasons why Muslims do not study the Quran is because of that understanding. Why? Because they told us that people, you are not equipped to study the Quran or understand it. You cannot. So they created the clergy in Islam. Okay, so what should we do? Study the hadith. Should we study the hadith? Not even the hadith that you're not equipped to understand it. So what should we do? Read the books of Torah, Ibn Taymiyyah, etc. Okay, can I read them? No, you cannot. There is a sheikh or scholar that has to teach you this. That's the damage we did to this deen. So now we have three barriers between us and Quran. We created the hadith, and then the Torah or the fiqh that was developed in the 2nd or 3rd or 4th century, and then the sheikh that has to teach you those books. But forget it about trying to understand the hadith or the Quran. You can't. And you want to produce success story, or you want to produce a generation of people who think critically or objectively or independently? Of course not. Very limited ambition, very narrow. It's a religion. We took that religion, we made it so superficial, so narrow, so rigid. It was meant to be inspiring and empowering guidance. We turned into rigid law. It becomes everything is halal or haram. We need a fatwa. I'm going to open my laptop. Should I open it this way or oriented them? Let's ask a faqih. Let's get the fatwa for it. That's what we did. And with all the emphasis of the Quran on Bani Israel's story, so that we cannot commit their mistakes, we committed each and every mistake they did. Each one. Every mistake that we did, that they did, we committed, even though Quran in so many surah bring that story for the main reason for us to avoid those pitfalls or those mistakes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. I think you described the problem very well. So, Brother Ayman, was this recorded? I think we should post it. I think understanding the issue is very important, for the others that did not attend to hear it. Brother,
yes,
I guess
yes, this is being recorded.
Please post it. I think the Sheikh really. Now the Sheikh, if you don't mind, the Sheikh. So what's the solution? You described the problem, the solution, because I've seen just as an observer, that there were scholars that really tried to fight this movement in their own way. The one I would like to mention was Sheikh Al-Ghazali, Allah yarhamu. He really tried hard, and he was attacked. I've seen him being attacked. Sheikh Al-Qardawi being attacked in Algeria and worldwide. And it seems the powers to be, this is what they wanted. It did suit them. Okay, and they were pushing this way of understanding Islam. So what's the solution going forward?
That's a big question.
Or what should it be?
Obviously, there is no easy solution for a problem that developed over many centuries.
I even saw your uncle being attacked. I even saw your uncle, Allah Yafakasar Rashid Al-Ghannouchi, being attacked. Yeah. I've been at the convention in the 80s and I've seen that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So there is no easy solution for a problem that developed over centuries and affected, in medicine, even the most severe problem, if it is not spread in all the body, they still can deal with it. Yes. But when it is spread, they say it's too late. Unfortunately, we have some similar situation here because this problem is deeply rooted and affected the mindset, affected the personality, affected the behavior, affected everything. But of course, we will never be in a hopeless situation. That's what I mentioned at this last Jumu'ah. I mean, before talking about the situation and how bad it is, I started from the beginning. I said, we should not accept this situation as normal. That's not where we belong. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be. Where Allah, Quran says clearly that we are expected to be model and leading community, playing or fulfilling the same role among nations like the role fulfilled by the Prophet amongst us. I mentioned the verse of Surah Al-Baqarah 143 and Surah Al-Hajj 77 and 78. لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا. ليكون الرسول شهيدا عليكم وتكونوا شهداء على الناس. It's very clear. The verse is very clear, say where we belong. And we are nowhere close, but we have to believe, number one, it's not optional to close the gap and to be in the position that Allah has chosen for us. هو اجتباكم. هو اجتباكم. He offered you this honor or this responsibility. So it's not optional to keep watching that gap widening between where we are and where we're supposed to be. And number two, it's doable. So we should and we can, bi'idhnillah. Why? And I mentioned why we can. Number one is that Allah promised that if we do our part, He will help us. But only if we do our part. وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرَهُ إِن تَنْصُرُوا اللَّهَ يَنْصُرْكُمْ. So if you reach your limit and you fall short, Allah can take care of the rest, but not before that. If you stop 1 inch before your limit, then you are still on your own. So then number one. Number two, it happened before. This deen produced a great success story in a very, very bad situation. Our situation nowadays cannot be compared to the situation of people in Mecca. There is no comparison. We are in much, much better position. I mean, and yet this deen took those people and generated from them or transformed them into leaders and champions of a great civilization. Number three, there are nations and countries who were in much worse situation than Muslims in the 60s and the 70s. And now they are way ahead of us by light years. What's special about them? I mean, what is it that they have that we don't? And number four, we have that great, inspiring, and empowering religion that can give us the edge. Now, what's the solution? There is, like Einstein say, I spend 90% of my time and effort to understand the problem and 10% to solve it. 10% of my time and my effort to solve it. Because if you have the proper understanding, solution will pop up. So number one, we need to accept the fact that situation is extremely bad, very embarrassing, very shameful, and must be changed and can be changed. Number two, we have to abandon all the approaches that we have been adopting and that lead nowhere. We need to forget about denial. We need to forget about excuses and justifications. We need to forget about blaming our failure on somebody else. So no denial, no justification, no blaming. Take charge. We are in this situation because of our own doing. قل هو من عند أنفسكم فبما كسبت أيديكم. It's the work of your own hands. It's you only have yourself to blame. If we cross this step, then we can talk about the solution. Majority of Muslims are not willing. Some of them will tell you we are good. We are the best ummah. These Western people, they are just bunch of drinkers and the womenizers, etc. And we are the Muslims. We are the great. So that these are living in a very completely different world. They are total denial. And others will come up with excuses to convince you that things could not be better than that. And others will come up with somebody to blame. No, we are victims of colonizations. We are victims of conspiracy. the whole world conspire against us. So there is nothing we can do. All these will lead to one conclusion. ليس بالإمكان أحسن مما كان. You cannot, things could not be better. So all of these have to be abandoned and adopt the Islamic approach. Whatever happened, it's because of our own doing, and then we are responsible to change it. We should and we can. Now we can talk about solution. For me, nothing short of developing a fresh understanding of Islam will cut it. No amount of patchwork to the prevalent Salafi understanding will get us anywhere. We need fresh understanding of Islam that will achieve the maqasid, the ultimate purposes of this deen within the thawabit as much as possible. First of all, the list of constant things, we should not make it longer. And number two, whenever any of the thawabit, what we call them constant, does not achieve the maqsad, the purpose, we should put it on the table to think about, to discuss it. And Umar al-Khattab did this. We mentioned this several times. Umar al-Khattab stopped al-mu'allafati qulubhum, even though it is a verse in Quran. Zakat, there are 8 categories that will qualify for zakat. One of them was the leader of tribes that the Prophet ﷺ wants to neutralize and prevent them from allying with Quraysh. So he was giving them some of the money of zakat. Umar al-Khattab, who came a couple of years after the Prophet ﷺ, when these people came to get their share of zakat, say, I'm not going to give you. The situation has changed. Your tribe, most of it is in our community. So the reason, the purpose, you can see how the people who understood this deen properly, when he saw that this does not fulfill the purpose that was in the mind of Muhammad ﷺ, he made ijtihad and he did not give them any zakat money. And we said how he he changed the way to distribute the spoils of war. And people were against him. People said, what are you doing? The Prophet ﷺ used to give 80% of the spoils of the war to the soldiers. He said, I cannot do that anymore. Because at the time of the Prophet, the spoils of the war were camels and horses and sword and shield. And now we have the whole Roman Empire and the whole Persian Empire. I cannot distribute it among soldiers. So he took that to the Bayt al-Mal, or the treasure, and he paid the soldiers' salaries. So unless we accept this fact that we need fresh understanding of Islam based on the mission of Islam, that this Islam is essentially a mission with maqasid. It's a mission of tazkiyah and islah with those purposes. On top of them is justice, freedom, human dignity, peace, security, virtue, and prosperity. That's what I believe are the purposes of this deen, 7. So we need an understanding built on that. And then, of course, we need to revive the elements that were marginalized by the Salafi understanding. The spiritual dimension of Islam is extremely important. It's not because the Sufi or some of the Sufi took the spirituality to an extreme that the Salafi will try to impose us on us an Islam that is very dry, has no spirituality. So spiritual, the sense of mission, the idea, the concept of maqasid, that this deen is not the check boxes. It's not a checklist of things to do. There are purposes that need to be achieved, that will be worked on. The human dimension, by the way, from the question that Abu Abdullah has asked, this is a human dimension that essentially we are all members of large family called humanity, has one father and one mother, all of us. إن خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا, not to judge each other, to get to know each other and cooperate for the greater good. So the human dimension, that we need to stop seeing this world as Muslims and non-Muslims. No, people are human beings. That's number one. And therefore, this person is your brother or sister in humanity. Like, what's number two? Number two, they are your fellow citizens. Like, what's number three? Number three, they are your neighbor or your colleague. So where is the religion come from? The religion, it's something between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Show them the beauty of Islam in your behavior. Tell them about Islam if you have a chance. They accept it or they don't accept it, it's between them and Allah. All the other relationships should continue. If they are your relatives, if they are your neighbors, if they are your fellow citizen, or even fellow human. So reviving that بعد الإنساني in Islam, روحي, spiritual, إنساني, risali, sense of mission, maqasidi, the fact that this religion came with purposes to fulfill, and then the emphasis on character, akhlaq. The Prophet says that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he summarized his mission, but just to perfect the manners of people. Do we have the best manners in the world nowadays? No, we don't. When it comes to honesty, when it comes to work ethics and values, we don't. I mean, we're not on the top of the list. We're at the bottom of the list. Fresh understanding of Islam based on the proper concept of Tawheed as a relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based essentially on love and gratitude, not on fear from punishment. That should be your bottom line. That's when everything else goes wrong, everything else fails. No more incentive. Your iman went flat. The only thing that is left is a fear of punishment. But that should be like the spare wheel. That should be temporary until your iman picks up. So we know that our iman goes up and down, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So if your love and gratitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala start going down and your iman is weaker and weaker, you have less incentive to wake up to pray Fajr or to do good. Your incentives are, you can notice, then the bottom line, the last thing, the last resort is that fear of punishment. So you continue to do the minimum, praying, abstaining from major sins, etc., until your iman picks up. And then you regain the proper relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even this fear has to be divided into the main fear in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the fear of coming short, is al-haya, is وَلَا تُخْزِنَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. People are worried about falling short. Even comes before the fear of punishment. The fear of punishment should be the bottom line. Now, the majority of Muslims nowadays, the vast majority, are worshipping just out of fear of punishment, because that's what they were told, even from their parents or of their sheikh. The parents may take the shortcut. Oh, my son or my daughter, pray, otherwise Allah will throw you in hellfire. Fast, or Allah will. That's when they hear Allah always associated with throwing in hellfire. Fresh understanding of Islam, it's a new paradigm. And then try to rally people around it. And part of that understanding of Islam is the model of the Prophet. When Rasul ﷺ says Sunnati, it does not mean the hadith only. It means my methodology, tariqati. Sunnati tariqati means my model. There is a very successful model that the Rasul ﷺ implemented to build and lead his community. We need to understand that model and see how can we apply it. Not exactly word for verbatim, because things have changed, but we need to find the essential elements in that model. The fact that the Prophet built his community around the mission, that's an essential element of his model. The leadership model of the Prophet, how he exercised leadership in a very effective way. So developing fresh understanding of Islam and building a community or movement on that understanding and on that model of the Prophet. I know this is easier said than done, but it is doable, bi'idhnillah, if there are the right people who commit to make it happen. I think somebody wants to ask questions.
Yes, I just, this is Asma. Just had a question regarding when we were discussing about Quran, you know, the way to study the Quran when we study Quran. So what do you think should be the methodology? Should we just go on to the Mufassirun first and their opinion, or first we should get an understanding of ourselves? And some people don't consider, you know, the Mufassirun because they did everything interpretation according to their times. So because we were discussing about the contextual and the, you know, foundational verses. So what should be our approach? Because I've been to many halqas and some people just don't regard the context at all. And they just say, I mean, Quran is for all times to come, and we are going to just interpret it in a generic way. And so, and some people take context. So I just wanted your opinion. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah khair, very good question. How did we learn anything that we learned in our lives? I mean, none of us was born medical doctor or engineer or IT person. None of us. We all learned this. We need to do the same with the Quran. Study. Study meaning reflecting, contemplating, searching the meaning of words, asking somebody who probably have more knowledge when you are not sure, when you find some contradictory explanation. That's what we did with all our textbooks. All what I keep saying, do with the Quran what you did with your textbook. Reflection, contemplation. Yes, reading what Mufassirin have come up with is good, but it's not binding. It should not be limiting. We shouldn't say that whatever Mujahid and Qatada and Ibn Abbas, 3 or 4, came up with the interpretation of this verse, we cannot add to that. That's wrong. So, reflection, contemplation, research or searching the meaning of words, asking someone, and then using those in parallel, using those tafsir, they can be very helpful, but not in the way that we're gonna read to memorize. No, we're gonna read because the words of Mufassirin is not Quran. The word of Mufassirin is an interpretation of the Quran. So we have to have some conversation with that, which means that does this make sense? Is it logic, etc.? Because sometimes the same verse is explained or interpreted in 3 very different meanings. So, like this critical thinking, we have to exercise it even with Mufassirin. We have to exercise critical thinking even with the shuyukh who teach you in halaqah nowadays. Critical thinking is essential. Quran teaches us critical thinking beyond imagination, because even Allah, the Creator, when He asks us to do something, He explains why, so that we don't accept things without thinking. He explains, يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من. There is so many explanation of the why in Quran to train us to have that critical thinking. And even Allah had conversation with Iblis. He had a conversation with Shaitan to teach us also the adab of hiwar. That if Allah, the Creator, had that conversation, how can human being that cannot tolerate differences, or that each one try to impose their view on the other, or think that they hold the absolute truth. So again, the key word here is studying, and do it exactly the same way that any student has done with a textbook. Open, read, and study. Unfortunately, I wish that the effort that is being done on Quran memorization, which is great, and Quran reading, There are halaqa, people sit down, read Quran, great. And teaching people tajweed, great. Listening to the Quran, great. But very little is done in the way of understanding the Quran or studying. Even though that if you have to choose, now if you can do all of them, great. But if you have to choose, studying the Quran should come first. Even before memorization, even before reading, even before learning tajweed, studying a verse in Quran and apply it, it's much more, it's much better than reading pages without understanding or memorizing pages without understanding.
Yeah. So the other point I wanted to make, are we allowed to do our own tafsir? Like, for example, there are some verses, like I was discussing with my friend, this one, 355, about Isa alayhi salam, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Isqala Allahu ya Isa inni mutawaffika wa rafa'aka. So there are different verses, different interpretations. So I mean, there are two camps, you know, one thinks that he will come back, the other thinks doesn't. So are we allowed in this case to make our own judgment and have our own thinking and our own ijtihad and tafsir and, you know, stuff like that?
Okay. There is a very fine line between reflection and making judgment or making fatwa. Reflection and contemplation is required from every Muslim. Thinking about the meaning of the verse, having a discussion like you had with your friend. That's required, not only allowed, it's required. But reaching conclusion, that requires more broader knowledge to reach the point where you say this is halal or that's haram. That's fatwa. That's different. So I always distinguish between the two. Reflection and contemplation and discussion about the verses of the Quran, it's not only permissible, it's required by every Muslim, for every Muslim. But then you can't cross the barrier to say, okay, based on my understanding of this verse, I believe this is haram, or that's fatwa. That's a judgment. So that's one thing. The second thing is some verses like the one you mentioned, they are in a very delicate area of Aqidah. People have to be very careful about. Even about reflection. When it comes to Jesus, did he die? Was he raised, etc.? These are very delicate Aqidah issue. That's probably will reduce the amount of reflection even about them. Even the amount of reflection will be reduced, as opposed to verses that talk about interaction and muamalat and etc. That's where the margin for reflection is much greater. So two things. Number one, distinguish between reflection, contemplation, discussion, attempt of interpreting verses of Quran, which is, again, we need to create the whole dynamics and movements among Muslims doing this, and then between issuing fatwa. And number two, not all the verses are the same. Some verses that has to do with the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the Jesus, with etc. These came to an area that is very delicate. That's the margin for reflection and contemplation and interpretation will be reduced, because these are matter of aqidah, very sensitive, and we cannot, and they come in a different verses that are related, and we have to be careful about even and trying to interpret them without solid background.
So why do you think the crucifixion of Isa alayhi salam and this one, you know, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took him, are not very clear? And it's kind of a hint, and we can go in different direction, different trajectories with the interpretation. Why do you think this has happened when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could be very extremely clear about it?
I don't know. I mean, we can only try to explore or figure out the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot tell for sure what is it. But the other thing that I really wants us to emphasize and focus on are the verses that have practical implications in our lives. This idea of Jesus, what happened to him, Allah raised him, who was crucified was someone like him, or I don't think that's gonna make any difference in our lives. So we have to accept the prevalent understanding and move on, because it is an issue that does not have implications. Our conversation with our fellow Christians, we believe that Jesus is a prophet, had miracles like other prophets, was born in a miraculous way, like Adam alayhi salam was, and Hawa and Eve were born also in a miraculous way. That does not make him anything more than a human being. What happened to him, again, we probably need to accept the prevalent understanding that Allah raised him, and he was not exactly the one who was crucified. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did that, that's very hard to figure out.
Thank you. So we can, speculate, right? In this regards, it won't be negative. We can speculate and make our own decision, because this is, would you call this mutashabihat, in the category of mutashabihat, these verses?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jazakallah.
Sure. I think our focus should be mostly on the foundational verses.
Muhkamat, yeah.
Foundational principles verses. And then on the contextuals verses, we should put the effort or make the effort to contextualize them. There are verses that need to be contextualized.
Yeah.
Meaning, number one, we should be very confident to say this verse does not apply for us in America. This verse applies to us in this way. It might be different, situation might be different in other places. The first verse that we said does not apply to us may apply to them. And the second verse that we said it applies, but in this way, other people in other contexts, they can say it applies in a different way. So this is the contextual. And our focus should be on the foundational verses. Yesterday in my discussion with long discussion with brother, I said that when it comes to qital, fighting, first of all, it has to be separated from jihad, because they have nothing to do with one another. You can be mujahid even though you are not involved in any fight. Mujahid meaning you're doing your utmost, whether in your study, whether as a parent, whether you as a Muslim, whether in da'wah, whatever you're doing. When you do your utmost, meaning you're doing jihad in that particular. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says jahadu bi amwalihim wa anfusihim, meaning they spared nothing fi sabilillah. It doesn't mean that they have to take a weapon and go and fight. That's called fighting. And then there are so many verses about fighting. Most of them are contextuals. I can distinguish only 2 or 3 that I believe they are foundational verses of qital. Why I say contextuals? Because at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this community in Medina was in a very hostile environment. And this idea of peaceful kafir almost did not exist. Everybody, the word kafir at that time, it was an enemy of the state who is conspiring, waiting to attack, etc. And then, of course, the whole context is very different. There was no international law, there was no treaty, there was no border, etc. Now we are in a very different context. So when you say قاتلوهم, اقتلوهم حيث ثقفتموهم, etc., that does not apply. It does not apply to someone who is your neighbor, who chose not to accept Islam, but he is peaceful. Does not apply. So I came up only with verse from Surah Al-Baqarah. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ. It says self-defense. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا. Don't exceed the limit. If somebody transgresses the border, you push them back, but do not transgress, do not exceed the limit. وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Let me make sure that I get the translations of these verses. So the first verse is in Surah Al-Baqarah, which most of the time it's not mentioned because they don't like these verses. They like the other ones. So if someone has translation of the Quran handy, it's a Baqarah 190. Baqarah 190. وقاتلوا في سبيل الله الذين يقاتلونكم ولا تعتدوا إن الله لا يحب المعتدين. Please, if you can get quick translation, let me know. The other one is Al-Hajj 39. So Baqarah 190, Hajj 39. That this is the first verse that permitted Muslims to fight. Udhina, it's a permission. And it was to secure the freedom of everybody to worship. ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لهدمت صوامع
I got it. I got Baqarah 190, by the way.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so by Mustafa Khattab, fight in the cause of Allah only against those who wage war against you, but do not exceed the limits. Allah does not like the transgressors.
Very clear. You want, Sister Asma, you want to say something? So, Al-Hajj 39, it tells you why Muslims were allowed to fight. Not to kill people or not to, was so that to secure the freed, so that corruption and injustice does not prevail on earth. To secure ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لهدمت صوامع وبيع وصلوات ومساجد. That if this was permitted, so that to secure the right of people, the freedom of conscience and the freedom of worship. Did you get Hajj 39?
Yes, I did. You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Permission, okay, أُذِنَ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ. Permission to fight back is hereby granted to those being fought, for they have been wronged, and Allah is truly most capable of helping them.
Keep going.
Oh, that was 39. Then 40, okay. They are those who have been expelled from their homes for no reason other than proclaiming our Lord is Allah. Had Allah not repelled the aggression of some people by means of others, destruction would have surely claimed monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques in which Allah's name is often mentioned. Allah will certainly help those who stand up for Him. Allah is truly all-powerful, almighty. That's
you see the purpose of this permission, first of all, against those who are fighting you. So it's in self-defense, and the Prophet ﷺ never was involved in initiated the war, was always in self-defense. And then if without this permission, there will be destruction of, and then it mentioned all the worship places even before the mosques. Sawami'u wa bi'un wa salawat in churches, synagogues, etc., monasteries. And then the verse in Surah Al-Anfal 60 and 61, that even having power in Islam is meant to avoid war. Turhibuna is to deter, not to scare or frighten, or this all terrorism. وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِّبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ تُرْهِبُونَ بِهِ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ. To avoid war, be strong so that war does not happen, so that the people will not attack you. And the next verse will make it clear, because it says, if they go for peace, go for it. وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا. Do you have that verse? 60 and 61.
I do. You want me to read them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So 60, prepare against them what you believers can of military power and cavalry to deter Allah's, to deter, that's the
To
word he
deter,
uses.
that's
Yeah.
the key word, to deter.
To deter Allah enemies and your enemies as well as other enemies unknown to you, but known to Allah. Whatever you spend in the cause of Allah will be paid to you in full, and you will not be wronged. Then 61, and if the enemy is inclined towards peace, make peace with them.
That's it.
And
Right
put
there,
your- yeah.
right there, right there. You can see these are what I believe they're not contextuals. They apply at every time and every context because they state principles. They state principles and they're not contextuals. So distinguishing which verse, which is very important. Based on that, I make this conclusion, I reach this conclusion that in today's time, in our time, fighting is permissible only against occupation. That's my belief. This international fighters go from place to place and fight, that has no roots in Islam. Taking a truck and driving, killing civilians in the street, that's horrible. Has nothing to do with Islam. Based on all of this, you put it in my understanding now, it's only people who are under occupation have the right to fight back, to end occupation and push it back.
Sheikh, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I just have a question. If so, I've been hearing all this. I think I've been attending now and then. The question really is how to spread this new understanding on this message or this contextualize. So you have, it has to be something that's reliable, something that has integrity, something people believe in, or institutionalized that have an influence on a huge number of people.
Let's talk about this. Yeah, I agree. It's a very
you understand?
Big
It's the how.
The how. Let's talk about this, inshallah, another time because we reach our time, and then also maybe we can also meet if you are interested and others, where we can have long or lengthy discussion and in-depth discussion about the how.
Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Sayyid. See you, everybody, inshallah, at noon Sunday. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.